Rakeyan Windusakti, a name cloaked in reverence and mystery, was born in a time when the kingdom of Sunda was consolidating its influence over the western half of Java. His birth took place in a highland settlement nestled amidst the misty valleys of the Priangan region. The name Windusakti derives from two old Javanese and Sanskritic roots, Windu meaning a sacred time cycle or cosmic age, and Sakti meaning divine power or spiritual might. His name essentially signified he who possesses the power of the ages, or sacred strength of the cosmic era. As a child, Windusakti exhibited extraordinary intuition and wisdom far beyond his years. His mentors were not only scholars but also forest sages who taught him the deeper meanings of unity between nature and human order. Rakeyan Windusakti was born into the royal bloodline of the Sunda dynasty, most likely a descendant of Prabu Langlangbuwana, or a collateral line tied to the house of Redakandayun. His mother is believed to have been a noblewoman from a forested region in western Galuh, while his father, although unnamed in surviving records, was a spiritual warrior, possibly a rishi general known for his mastery of martial and metaphysical disciplines. Windusakti was groomed not for conquest but for guardianship. While other noble children were trained for courtly life and military parades, he was taken to sacred groves and taught ancient cosmology, a Maharshi in the making. These early teachings would later be reflected in the mystical undertones of his governance. Perhaps one of the most telling signs of his destiny occurred during a pilgrimage to Mount Kakrabuana. As he stood before an ancient megalith said to house the soul of a previous sage king, a bolt of lightning struck the stone, unharmed, and the villagers came to believe that the boy prince was the reincarnation of a long-lost Raja seer. Rakeyan Windusakti was no longer seen merely as royal blood, but as sacred blood, destined to guide the Sundanese people through spiritual and political trials. His ascension to the throne was not marked by a violent conquest or palace intrigue, but rather a ceremonial affirmation by elders, sages, and nobles who recognized his unique blend of wisdom and charisma. His rise to power followed the abdication, or disappearance, of a ruler whose reign had fallen into stagnation and cosmic imbalance. Was summoned to serve. Believing his destiny was not to rule with iron, Windusakti's coronation was unlike any other. Held not in a lavish palace, but in a sacred clearing encircled by banyan trees and river stones. The ceremony involved offerings to ancestral spirits, chants from forest hermits, and the placement of the ancient Luk Mankarat dagger into his hands. The elders knelt in affirmation. He did not wear a golden crown, symbolizing humility and spiritual stewardship. During his reign, he restructured the spiritual administration of the kingdom, ensuring that every district had a guru bhumi, a sacred land teacher, who guided not only farming techniques, but also cosmological rituals. He reinforced the tradition of Tatanen Sakawitan, ancestral agriculture, and prohibited wasteful exploitation of sacred groves. His court welcomed not just nobles. He transformed the capital into a hybrid of palace and sanctuary. It was during his rule that the sacred garden known as Taman Bima Arga flourished. His reign was not without challenges. Tribes on the kingdom's fringes occasionally tested the king's resolve. Rather than leading armies, Windusakti often diffused tensions by sending emissaries trained in negotiation. There are tales of his monks calming raging warriors with sacred mantras and taming wild beasts with music. These stories are myth, but inscriptions discovered near Siwade and Garut reference emissaries who resolved conflicts without bloodshed. Perhaps his greatest internal trial came when a drought threatened to devastate the rice cycle. Rather than impose harsh taxes or force migration, he spent 7 days fasting on Mount Kendeng, speaking to the Ro Hujan, the rain spirit, and offered the sacred Pusaka Luhuring Winning, the crystal water vessel, into a spring. Rains followed within a fortnight, solidifying his status not just as ruler. The people believed it was the king's union with divine nature that restored balance, solidifying his status not just as ruler, but as a living link between man and the divine. The royal chronicles often referred to him as Ratu Pawanang Langit Bumi, the king with authority over sky and earth. His body was considered a vessel of the world's equilibrium. The legends of Rakeyan Windusakti's mystical powers remain among the most fascinating tales in Sundanese lore. His connection to the unseen world went far beyond religious rituals, an intuitive mastery of nature's energy. This sacred skill allowed him to sense disturbances in cosmic balance. One of the most revered symbols of his power was the sacred heirloom known as Pusaka Luhuring Wening, or the vessel of the highest clarity. was a crystal bowl said to contain water that never evaporated. The water shimmered with inner light and was used in blessings. It is said that anyone who stared into its depths without purity of heart would lose their way in time. Windusakti also mastered the martial discipline of Silat Gunung Rahyang, a spiritual combat art that relied on breath control. He used these skills to defend. He taught this art to a select group of protectors called the Manggala Rasa, guardians who swore an oath to defend the kingdom's spiritual integrity rather than its borders. He was also credited with the ability to speak with spirits of the land. Called Kayangan Ro, particularly those guarding rivers, farmers often reported that after meditating near certain stones, Windusakti had touched. This spiritual governance turned him into a semi-divine figure. His capital was not feared by neighboring realms. Pilgrims traveled from distant kingdoms to witness the Ratu Daraja Rasa, king of sacred feeling. But woven seamlessly into governance, he was a king whose rule mirrored the movements of stars and whose laws flowed like rivers. As Rakeyan Windusakti's reign matured, the stability he brought was occasionally tested by forces beyond his immediate control. While his spiritual policies brought peace and prosperity, the kingdom still had to contend with natural disasters, shifting regional alliances, and the slow encroachment of external beliefs and influences. Notably, trade routes connecting to the Srivijayan remnants and the Javanese Mataram kingdom began to shift the cultural landscape, introducing new ideas, religious doctrines, and forms of governance. Windusakti, though open-minded, remained cautious of any system that prioritized conquest over harmony. The greatest external challenge came in the form of an attempted incursion by a coalition of rival chieftains from the west. They sought to exploit what they perceived as a soft king more interested in meditation than militarization. However, they underestimated both the loyalty of his people and the unseen protections woven into his reign. As their forces approached the sacred riverbanks near the Sipere Valley, a strange mist engulfed the terrain, disorienting them. Locals whispered that the king had summoned the Kabuyutan Geni, ancient elemental guardians. Whether divine intervention or clever forest tactics, the invaders retreated without bloodshed. Internally, Windusakti was also tested by the weight of continuity. He had no biological heir strong enough, by character or destiny, to carry his spiritual legacy. For years, the court debated the succession, fearing a vacuum of leadership. But Windusakti, always several steps ahead, had quietly been preparing his nephew, Rakeyan Wastu, son of a noble house tied by blood and lineage. Wastu was not only trained in administration and battle, but was also taken through Windusakti's own spiritual journey. Pilgrimages to sacred sites, fasts in volcanic caves, and deep initiations under banyan trees. The ceremonial transfer of royal essence, known as Sesaji Pawitan Dharma, was a rare rite only performed when a king wished to pass on not just his throne, but also his sacred duties. Before hundreds of monks, elders, and forest priests, Windusakti placed the Pusaka Luhuring Wening into Wastu's hands. For 3 nights, they meditated facing opposite directions. Windusakti toward the mountain, Wastu toward the ocean. Upon completion, the elders confirmed that the line of spirit was intact. Rakeyan Wastu became the new king, while Windusakti took on the title of Rahiyang Tapak Luhur, the ascended sage. After stepping down, Windusakti did not vanish from history, but assumed a new role as a semi-reclusive teacher and wanderer. He spent the next years walking the remote paths of the Sunda highlands, building small hermitages, guiding lost travelers, and teaching spiritual knowledge to those worthy. His presence became mythic. Farmers claimed to see him appear during harvest blessings. Monks recounted visions of him guiding meditation. Though no longer a ruler, his influence remained etched into the very land and people. In this period of withdrawal, Windusakti completed what he called the Kawi Pangarasa, or hymns of empathic wisdom, a collection of poetic spiritual principles that blended local cosmology, ethical governance, and ecological stewardship. These hymns would later be preserved by Sundanese monks and integrated into the teachings of the Kahyangan Sunda, forming one of the oldest known texts in Sundanese spiritual tradition. His transformation from king to sage ensured that his legacy would not be measured in palaces or armies, but in balance, reverence, and timeless wisdom. Though no longer ruling from the royal court, Rakeyan Windusakti's presence as Rahiyang Tapak Luhur reverberated across the Sunda kingdom. His abdication was not a retreat, but a transformation from a sovereign of land to a sovereign of spirit. He became a living bridge between the temporal world and the sacred, inspiring a new generation of leaders, mystics, and common folk alike. His teachings, encapsulated in the Kawi Pangarasa, were studied not only by monks in secluded temples, but also recited by farmers during planting seasons and fishermen before venturing into the sea. His way of life in this final phase was marked by simplicity and presence. Dressed in humble white robes and adorned only by a strand of beads made from ancient kayu gaharu, agarwood, he roamed from one kabuyutan, sacred forest retreat, to another, choosing to stay in bamboo huts offered by villagers. The people began to refer to him with affectionate reverence as Rakeyan Windu, the grandfather of wisdom. He refused formal tributes but accepted offerings of water, fruit, or rice, symbols of the earth's grace. His voice, though calm, was said to carry truth like thunder wrapped in breeze. One of the most enduring stories of this period involved a confrontation with a group of mercenaries sent by a rival lord who feared Windusakti's growing spiritual influence. The warriors demanded his exile from the region. Instead of resisting, Windusakti invited them to share a meal. During the meal, he told stories of past kings and empires that fell not because of lack of weapons, but because of inner decay. One by one, the warriors laid down their blades, and a few even became his disciples. This incident became known as the Tapadibala Kalar, or the meditation at the Northern Hall, a symbol of nonviolent power. Windusakti's most trusted sacred heirloom, the Kundamani Manikmaya, a crystal-like stone said to carry both ancestral energy and divine resonance, was said to glow during his meditations, especially during lunar eclipses. This heirloom was not passed on, but rather hidden in the depths of the mountain caves at Mount Kakrabuana, guarded by layers of rituals, chants, and natural defenses. Its location remains one of Sunda's enduring mysteries, sparking pilgrimages and legends even today. As he neared the end of his mortal life, Windusakti reportedly gathered his closest disciples under the massive fig tree known as Kalakakradipa, deep in the forest of Gunung Padang. There he gave his final teachings, not in grand proclamations, but in silence. For 7 days he sat in meditation as the forest hushed around him. On the 8th day he opened his eyes, smiled, and lay down peacefully. His body was never buried in the traditional sense. Instead, the site became a tapak sakti, a sacred footprint where flora flourished unnaturally bright and animals lingered unafraid. Centuries after his passing, the spiritual resonance of Rakeyan Windusakti, now immortalized as Rahiyang Tapak Luhur, continued to shape the cultural and geographical identity of the Sunda region. His life became the axis mundi for countless tales, legends, and traditions, anchoring the hearts of Sundanese people to their sacred past. One of the most important geographical legacies is Gunung Tapak Luhur, a mountain believed to be the last place he meditated. Pilgrims journey up its forested paths each year on specific lunar dates, chanting age-old mantras said to have been passed down through Windusakti's disciples. Springs from the mountain slopes are considered holy, often collected in clay pots and stored in family altars. A cluster of bamboo-built structures known as Sang Rahiyang still hosts spiritual gatherings, storytelling nights, and traditional healing ceremonies inspired by his teachings. Another physical marker of his legacy lies in Kabuyutan Sipasung, an ancient sanctuary in the Tasikmalaya region, thought to have been one of the forest hermitages where Windusakti wrote portions of the lost Sulanjana manuscript, a philosophical work describing the cosmic balance between nature, humanity, and the divine. Fragments of this manuscript survive today in oral poetry traditions and hidden script carvings on old stones preserved by local elders. In Sundanese performance arts, especially wayang golek and longsir, Rakeyan Windusakti is portrayed as the sage king who wears a white robe, carries a bamboo staff, and speaks only in verse. Children are taught stories of his wisdom in schools and community gatherings, where his image is painted on walls or woven into cloth as part of batik motifs called tapak rahiyang. Even in urban centers, his symbolism survives. Some parks and monuments in Bandung and Garut are named in his honor. Modern scholars of Sundanese history and spirituality often cite Rakeyan Windusakti as the bridge between the Galuh Sunda royal tradition and the spiritual movements that later developed into Kejawen and Sunda Wiwitan. His integration of royal discipline, mystical exploration, and ecological harmony remains deeply relevant, particularly in an age where environmental wisdom is once again being sought after. In spiritual circles, he is still invoked as a guru lineage, a timeless teacher who transcends historical bounds. To this day, when Sundanese people speak of Hirap nu Soyunan Jung Alam, a life in harmony with nature, they are echoing Windusakti's most powerful legacy. Though centuries have passed, his name lives on not merely in stone or scroll, but in the rustling leaves of sacred groves, in the chants at ancient springs, and in the breath of a people who remember.